All right, Larry Krueger here from the Pig and a Pickle Krug Show with a little college football video. And of course, this video brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. Check that link in the description. Use the promo code Krug, and they'll match you up to your first $100. And of course, thanks to Pig and a Pickle, the title sponsor of the Krug Show. Check them out in Emeryville and Corte Madera. They're open 7 days a week from 11 a.m. till 8 p.m. or until they run out. Pig and a Pickle, the best barbecue in all of Northern California. All right, sitting on the couch today watching some college football, and man, the Georgia Bulldogs absolutely destroyed Florida State. For the people who were saying Florida State should have made the playoffs, no, Florida State should not have made the playoffs. Florida State got drubbed by Georgia 63-3. 63-3 in a bowl game. Both teams, now Georgia's 13-1, Florida State's now 13-1. But I mean, the differences between these teams are night and day. And Georgia takes care of business, and they knock off Florida State. But man, the fact that they just annihilated them. I mean, the spread was 23.5, and they won by 60. Georgia was the best team this year in college football. And they're not even in the 4-team playoffs. Yeah, they lost to Bama in the SEC championship game. I saw it. And if they had beaten, if they had beaten the Tide that day, then they would have been in the playoff. But if you really look closely at it, I mean, Georgia, in a lot of ways, I think is the best team in the best conference, and they're 13-1. And they're not in the playoff, and it's just out. It's really wrong on many levels. If you look at it, so okay, Michigan is automatically in, right? They go 13-0. 13-0 out of the Big Ten. They beat the Buckeyes. They're in. They're in the playoff. Okay, I get that. Washington goes 13-0 in the Pac-12, a lesser league, but then they win the Pac-12 title game over Oregon. They go 13-0, and because they went undefeated, they're in. Okay, I get that. So now we're debating 1-loss Texas, 1-loss Bama, and 1-loss Georgia for 2 spots. And Georgia's loss was to Bama in a game where they actually had more total yards than Alabama. They lost by 3 to Bama, 27-24. They went 8-0 in the regular season, then they wind up losing to Bama 27-24. So Georgia's loss is at a neutral site to Alabama 27-24. That's their 1 loss. Alabama's 1 loss was earlier in the year to Texas by 10, 34-24. Okay, Texas's loss is to Oklahoma in the Red River Shootout. They lost 34-30. What's the worst loss there? Is Georgia's loss to Bama worse than Texas's loss to Oklahoma? No, Oklahoma is the worst team that any of these teams lost to. Once again, Georgia lost to Bama. Bama lost to Texas. Texas lost to Oklahoma. In my opinion, you should get the 4 best teams in there. And I hate to say it, but Texas should have been on the outside looking in. Texas does not belong in this playoff. The Georgia Bulldogs would beat Texas in a head-to-head matchup. And then, I was looking at an article this afternoon. They say that Georgia, if they had played Texas at a neutral site, would be a 3-point favorite on a neutral field against the Longhorns. So, I mean, what are we doing here? I mean, this is why college football is so frustrating. Now, next year, they'll have the 12-team playoff, and they can argue between who's the 12th team and the 13th team. But, I mean, when you really look at it, Georgia would be favored on a neutral field over Bama, over Texas. They should have been in over Texas. Texas's loss to Oklahoma is significantly worse than Georgia's loss to Alabama at a neutral site in the SEC championship game. Oklahoma is not as good as Alabama. Losing to Oklahoma is a worse loss than losing to Alabama. And Georgia, Then you mix in the fact that Georgia has all the best talent. I mean, Georgia's been the top of the recruiting battles the last few years. They have the best roster. They have the best talent. The Bulldogs' talent is unbelievable. The tight end is fantastic. The running back, Milton, is terrific. They got athletes up and down on the defense. If then you look at it and you say, okay, if Georgia played Michigan, who would be favored? Georgia. If Georgia played Washington, who would be favored? Georgia. If Georgia played Texas, who would be favored? According to this article that I read, Georgia would be a 3-point favorite. So, I mean, you got the best talent, you got the best roster in the SEC. You're playing in the best conference in America, and you lose out to Texas out of the Big 12, despite the fact that you guys both have one loss. I mean, it doesn't really matter. It's college football. It's not like I really care. I didn't go to Georgia. I didn't go to Texas. I didn't go to any of these schools. I have no dog in this fight. I have no allegiance. But I'm just saying, there's no doubt in my mind that Georgia has the best talent in the country. They only lost one time by 3 points in the SEC title game to another team that has a ton of talent. And just because we don't want to put two SEC teams in the Final Four, we put Texas in over Georgia. And it's like a late loss in the year is worse than an earlier loss. I mean, it's just, they should have reassessed this thing, and it probably should have been Bama, Georgia, Washington, and Michigan. And Texas should have been on the outside looking in. But it's not going to be that way. Texas is in the playoff. Alabama's in the playoff. Washington's in the playoff, and Georgia on the outside looking in. They're not in the playoff. So, I mean, it's a bitter pill if you're a Bulldog fan. I mean, seriously. Now, granted, they didn't play this awesome non-conference schedule. So I understand the people saying, well, who do they play? They didn't play a stellar non-conference. But still, you're talking about one loss to Alabama at the end of the year by a field goal in the SEC title game is a worse loss than Texas losing in the Red River Shootout to Oklahoma, who just got beat by Arizona in their bowl game. So, I mean, this is why college football is like, I love college football, but I don't care about really, the playoffs and who's in it. I watch it more for the talent and for the prospects and for the draft. I root for Texas A&M because I'm kind of an A&M fan from way back. But you know what? I don't really care at the end of the day about who's in the college playoff. I don't lose any sleep over who wins the national championship. To me, it's always been kind of an imperfect thing anyway. You play a bunch of bowl games, you play a bunch of different schedules, and then some writers decide who the best team was. It always has been a little murky, and that's why I'm welcoming the 12-team playoff with open arms. But if you're Charlie Warner, if you're a Georgia Bulldog fan, and you lost to Bama, and you're not in, and then you look at Texas, and Texas loses to Oklahoma, and they are in, and then Oklahoma gets beat in the bowl game by Arizona, and Georgia whoops Florida State 63-3. I mean, it just screamed out watching this thing today. You're watching the best team in the country. You're watching the best team in the country. The Georgia Bulldogs have the best talent in the best conference in America, and one loss, and they're not going to even have a chance to go for the national championship. So, to me, this is an old controversy dating back to, when this thing was decided weeks and weeks and weeks ago. But to me, what stamped it official today was Georgia beating Florida State 63-3. 63-3. So, I mean, if that's not a loud statement that you're the best team in the country, I don't know what is. 63-3. There were people that were arguing that Florida State should have been in the Final Four. Well, you can put that, of course, to rest. But then you go back to the Alamo Bowl from the other night, from Thursday night, Arizona beat Oklahoma 38-24. And that Oklahoma team that beat Texas, not just loses to Arizona, they also lost to Kansas and Oak State. So it's, Georgia's losses to Bama. Bama's only loss was to Texas. Texas loses to Oklahoma, who also got beat by Oak State, Kansas, and Arizona. And somehow Georgia gets screwed in this whole thing. It is what it is. Nobody died, but at the same time, it's kind of pathetic. College football has a Final Four, and the Georgia Bulldogs probably would be a betting favorite to beat all of the teams in the Final Four, and they didn't make it. So bring on the 12-team playoff. All right. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks to Pig and a Pickle for being the title sponsor of the Krueger Show. Thanks to Underdog Fantasy for sponsoring this video. Thanks to all you guys for supporting the Krueger Show on YouTube.